I want to welcome you to our session, Recovering Silence Histories, Epistemic Activism in California's San Joaquin Valley. Before I begin, I want to introduce our panelists. Immediately to my right is Donato Cruz. Donato holds a Master's of Arts degree in history from California State University, Bakersfield. He provides community and student research support and resources, processes collections, digitizes records, and helps organize yearly gallery exhibits on various historical topics. Donato is a specialist in the history of housing discrimination and redlining. You'll hear a little bit more about that today. His current projects include researching housing, urban renewal, suburbanization, and eminent domain for public education. Donato is currently the processing archivist and the lead researcher at the Historical Research Center and Archives at California State University, Bakersfield. Also joining us today is Dr. Oliver Rosales, professor of history and former faculty coordinator of the Social Justice Institute at Bakersfield College. He earned a BA in history at the University of California, Berkeley, and an MA in history at California State University, Bakersfield, and finished that off with a PhD in history from the University of California, Santa Barbara. He is also a former visiting faculty at the Bard College Master of Arts in Teaching program, and visiting fellow at the Hutchins Center for African and African American Studies at Harvard University. He is a contributor to the Chicano movement, Perspectives from the 21st Century, Civil Rights and Beyond, African American and Latina Activism in the 20th Century, the Journal of the West, and is the author of Civil Rights in Bakersfield, Segregation and Multiracial Activism in the Central Valley, and that's available on the University of Texas Press. He served as the nominating board, on the nominating board of the Organization of American Historians, and is a former board chair with California Humanities. At Bakersfield College, he teaches courses in Chicano history, California history, United States history, and world history. I used to think of archives as places where history was preserved, but I've come to see them as places where history is contested and where silence can speak volumes. So welcome everyone. My name is Christopher Livingston. I am the director of the Historical Research Center at California State University, Bakersfield. And I'll be moderating today's panel on recovering silenced histories. Before we dive into individual presentations, I want to briefly set the stage and explain what we're doing here. At its core, this session is about epistemic activism, a term we're using to describe deliberate efforts to challenge and restructure dominant knowledge systems within archives. That means recognizing how archival practices have historically excluded or erased marginalized voices, and actively working to change that through inclusive description, community collaboration, ethical appraisal, and more. Our goal today is not just to define epistemic activism, but to make it more concrete. You'll hear from our panelists who are applying these ideas in different ways through fieldwork, teaching, and community engagement. We're not offering a blueprint or best practices. What we're offering is a set of real grounded examples that ask, what does it mean to build archives that reflect the people they're meant to serve? This session has three main goals. One, to introduce epistemic activism and explore how it applies to archival work. Two, to share concrete strategies and case examples of how this work is happening in California's San Joaquin Valley, which is just up the road from here, especially in spaces where archives are scarce and stories are often left out. And three, to invite you into the conversation. We've built in time for discussion because we want to hear from you. What does this work look like in your context? What questions are you sitting with? Tensions are you navigating? So here's how this will run. I'll keep my intro brief, then each panelist will speak for about 15 minutes. We'll do a quick interactive activity midway through to get your input, and we'll end with a generous Q&A and open discussion. Don't save your questions till the end. If something hits you mid-session, write it down and come ask us. I was asked by the tech crew to let's use this mic here because it's the best connected. So we want this to be a dialogue, not necessarily a download. And with that, let's get started. So who gets to know? Who gets to speak? Who gets heard? Those questions don't just shape scholarship, they shape power. They also shape what and who remains visible. That's where our journey down the rabbit hole of epistemic activism began, with Humanities Beyond Bars, an oral history and public humanities project conceived by Dr. Michael Burrows, former director of California State University, Bakersfield's Kegley Institute of Ethics. The project confronted a hard truth. Entire populations, especially the incarcerated, are routinely excluded from our collective narratives and systems of knowledge. Despite high rates of incarceration in California, the realities of imprisonment and the voices of those incarcerated are often unseen and unheard. This lack of visibility leads, in turn, to a lack of understanding, both regarding the scale of incarceration and, importantly, the life experiences and human condition of those incarcerated. In order to document these voices and experiences, the Humanities Beyond Bars Oral History Project interviewed formerly incarcerated students enrolled on CSU campuses. We interviewed incarceration scholars and activists. Interview topics included the formative life experiences of formerly incarcerated students, the experience of societal reentry following incarceration, successes and challenges for formerly incarcerated students in pursuing a degree in the CSU system, the history and function of CSU's Project Rebound, which is a program that helps formerly incarcerated students transition back into education, and the scale and impact of incarceration in California's Central Valley. As the project developed, we began to have discussions about Jose Medina's work on the philosophy of protest and how it applies to the Humanities Beyond Bars project. Part of what Medina conceptualizes is an act of protest includes, quote, a way of bearing witness to injustice and sharing experiences with the public through testimonial acts, end quote. Interviewing formerly incarcerated students was a way for, or a way to document the lived experiences and amplify the voices of a traditionally marginalized community. The stories they shared shed light on the successes and the failures of pursuing education after incarceration and highlighted the difficulty they had in navigating not only the education system, but also society in general because of their status. Now, after hearing these testimonies, we started thinking that we had to do more than just collect oral histories for storage on a digital platform. We asked ourselves, how can we use this project and the information that we collected to influence change in our community? This process got me to thinking about how I can apply this approach in the archives. Adapted from Medina's theory, epistemic activism in the context of archival studies refers to efforts aimed at challenging and transforming dominant knowledge systems by reshaping how information is preserved, accessed, and understood. This form of activism seeks to confront power dynamics that are inherent in traditional archival practices, which often prioritizes certain voices, perspectives, and histories while marginalizing or silencing others. Through epistemic activism, scholars, archivists, and communities work to decolonize archives, include underrepresented or oppressed groups, and ensure that diverse forms of knowledge, especially those of Indigenous, Black, Latinx, and other marginalized communities, are documented, preserved, and made accessible. So in practice, epistemic activism might involve community-based archiving, revising descriptive standards, advocating for ethical considerations in the appraisal of materials, or leveraging digital technologies to democratize access. I think we all do this. It is rooted in a commitment to justice and the recognition that archives play a critical role in shaping collective memory, historical narratives, and power relations. The goal is not only to recover silenced histories, but also to create new knowledge paradigms that reflect the lived experiences and epistemologies of historically excluded groups. I extend this practice to further to include active participation in the democratic process, where new forms of knowledge and understanding are used to advocate and facilitate change in the community by presenting the knowledge the knowledge we generate to community leaders and elected officials at the grassroots level. That's the foundation we're building today. Epistemic activism isn't abstract. It's happening here on the ground, in archives, classrooms, and communities. So to show you what this looks like in practice, we've brought together our speakers doing exactly that work from different but deeply connected angles. First, you'll hear from Donato, who brings a field-based perspective rooted in public history and community engagement. Then Oliver will take us into the pedagogical and historical dimensions grounded in his work with students and regional history. And with that, I'll turn it over to Donato.
Okay, so I'm going to introduce America's Newest Cities, Redlining and Housing Discrimination in Kern County, which is a physical gallery, a digital gallery, and a digital archive as well. So for those that don't or haven't heard the term redlining is now used as a common terminology for official forms of discrimination. Redlining comes from historical definitions of maps that excluded people of color from official financing, but has now been adapted to acknowledge other forms of discrimination. So this project is held at the Walter Stern Library inside of California State University, Bakersfield, at the center, at the Historical Research Center, where Chris and I work together. Oh, and if you want to use a QR code, we have some questions. We're going to have a word cloud that's going to lead to our discussion for the Q&A. So I'll give you guys a minute if you want to scan it. Okay. So I'm going to talk about the purpose of the project. So the project covers 100 years of structural inequalities in education, suburbanization, housing, and other forms like policing as well. So this is a photograph of our gallery where we have kind of primary sources, photographs, and these historical narratives that talk about inequalities. And through this gallery, we were able to develop partnerships with the Ethnic Studies Department here locally, the History Department, and our California State University, Bakersfield. and also some partnerships with Bakersfield College and Oliver Rosales. So through this, we were also able to gain some advocacy with the city of Bakersfield and other community-based organizations that are still fighting for civil rights. So this research is led with the intention of changing things in our town. I think some of the beginning origins were started with an activist and a geographer, Jesus Garcia, who had reached out to me at the end of my master's thesis in 2020 and wanted to have a collaborative project to show this history of discrimination on maps. And through this project, I researched what were called racist covenants, which are housing agreements that have race restrictions that are, at least for the project, went between 1938 and 1950. And through those, we discovered about 200 tract maps, which are entire neighborhoods that had race restrictions. Later on, we were able to build those into a Google Earth map where our students can now access this historical data with an archive as well. So this actually was the beginning of many community conversations, some that started with one conference and then eventually sharing it with Dr. Oliver Rosales' Our California Story, which was a public humanities project. And through the years, I've been invited to do other public forums and other events that advocate for change. So this project started in 2022, about 2 years after I started researching this. And it really began with the emphasis of how many people were reaching out to us that wanted to learn about this. And that's where I spoke with our director, Chris Livingston, and we kind of identified that, this is something we had to do, right? But the parts were trying to figure out what we would have as deliverables. So in this eventually became 13 pages of redlining history research that covers housing before those overall housing restrictions before 1938, buying on contract, which was often the process where minorities were able to buy on a rent-to-own practice, which is very predatory. The covenant database, explain what covenants are. Geographic histories of East Bakersfield, that is a primarily Hispanic part of town now. Education, eminent domain, moving into neighborhood, highways, and so forth. And on the bottom, we have our archival database, which through the California Humanities Quick Grant, we were able to purchase these documents. And from other projects that I've heard around the United States, some have had success with MOUs, memorandums of understandings, to get these documents transferred. We were not able to be successful with that type of communication with our county, so we were actually forced to buy them. So today we're led with intention and impact with community. So I think some of these galleries and some of these conversations have started these direct conversations that we do intentionally. So here is from one of our forums in 2023. We have at the Kern County Museum, where we invited the public, Dr. Oliver Rosales, who teaches Chicano Studies, and Delano for Bakersfield College, is here talking about the importance of public humanities. At the time was a sitting board member at the California Humanities. And then Chris Livingston here is talking about our archival resources available to his class that semester. And through these forums, we're able to have conversations with students and community members about their experience with these types of histories and how it affects them today. So we've also had some research implications that kind of show the importance of having these types of histories available for people and the archives as well. So through this journal that was published by CSU Bakersfield faculty member, a doctoral student, and a undergraduate student. And it's a pretty long quote, but I think it underlines the importance, so I'm going to read it. So this is an excerpt from one of the co-authors, Marlene Herrera. And this is her quote: "As a Oaxacan daughter of immigrants, I, Marlene, a co-author in this article, grew up on the east side of Bakersfield. I grew up hearing jokes about avoiding the east side. That's the majority part, Latinx part of Bakersfield, and also the most affordable part of the city. made by white classmates. My teachers never addressed these comments, but instead encouraged them with a laugh. I was never taught the history of Kern County and how segregation of the city was literally designed by white supremacy. And she cites my research in understanding that history. It makes me grow more resentful toward the school districts that raised me. Our pláticas, conversations, have provided a space to feel comfortable sharing and rejecting these truths, discussing them with my family, and dreaming of what could be different. It also pushes me to work in the same districts and surrounded by students who come from the communities like I do. So in this, Marlene is dreaming and reflecting and acknowledging these systems of inequality. And it really tries to understand of how to make those systems work for her. And in there, another co-author questions this and says, if these systems are not built for us, then for who, right? So we're trying to understand the system to make it work for us as well. So through this is just to highlight the community conversations that we've had. So here in this article, it was a community activist group that was trying to change the housing element. The housing element here in California is where cities and counties work towards how they're going to support housing for the next 10 years. So in this, the civil rights group was trying to advocate for a fairer and a better understanding of how the city can support housing. And in this, they reached out to really emphasize and make it important to be known the history of housing discrimination and how it continues to trickle down today, right? And how to acknowledge the changes that need to come. And then here on the right, we have, or on the left, we met with the affordable housing unit of the city of Bakersfield. And here's, we're taking photos with city and urban planners who are understanding the gallery and having these conversations of how they can create better city planning. So eventually those conversations is what trickled into that housing element report, which in tune, even when they had conversations with us, the community didn't feel like it was enough, right? So the FHA in 1938 in their underwriting manual, the underwriting manual is what real estate agents use to kind of build on their practice of selling homes. They tell real estate agents to have race restrictions as prohibition of the occupancy of properties except by the race for which they are intended.
What happened 50 years ago does impact the community. We are living with many decisions that were made 50 years ago. Let me give you an example. This is from the New York Times, August 17, 2021, where they defined redlining. The term redlining, and I'm quoting this article, has become shorthand for many types of historic race-based exclusionary tactics in real estate, barring Black residents from buying homes. This has been policy that was established.
It's important for us to verbalize some of that history. This comes from the Oleander community, subsection F. That says, no persons of any race other than the white or Caucasian race shall use or occupy any building or any lot, except that this covenant shall not prevent occupancy by domestic servants of different race domiciled with an owner or tenant. That is the type of language that has led us to this moment, and that is the type of language that we must continue to acknowledge, whether it makes us uncomfortable or not.
Sorry about that. The video from the city council meeting where they had read our research from our website, and they were acknowledging how important it was to have the history of redlining in that housing element report. And in there was different conversations from the city council wanting to strike what they called a black eye from the city's history, right? So I think it's important to have these histories. I think through this kind of advocacy and understanding, I think if you write it, people will come. People are very interested. I think if it isn't talked about is because it's widely understood that these histories aren't written, right? Or I think conversations with other community members is, here's the history of Los Angeles, California. Where's Bakersfield, right? So I think people do want to have this history. And these are some of the examples of public policy documents that have cited our research. Here's the housing element. And the other side is the Kern County Regional Plan written by UC Merced, which emphasizes the labor efforts of the county. And in there, they also acknowledge the long history of redlining. So in here, I'm not going to read this quote, but I think a lot of, through this effort and through this panel, I think I've seen a lot of articles that are really trying to convince people who practice the humanities to be not just to study them, but to be involved, right? So I think through this, I think I question why do we need convincing? Why do we need, these types of arguments when we can do them, right? And then here I want to acknowledge my student assistant, Samuel's labor, and he's the one who helped me a lot with his database. So I want to give him a shout out. So coming to the close, I've been also working with processing our collection and getting some of the descriptions on our database. I've been using AI, and here AI is telling me that I am violating its terms by uploading racist documents. And it says that it's not designed to provide this type of content. And I've had previous arguments with it. I think this is like probably the 5th or 6th time I had uploaded these documents to it. And here's my counter argument. I tell it, didn't you just say, thank you for the context, your work is vital? So I think in this, I question, are we continued to be redlined, right? And then I'm gonna play a song by a Bakersfield College staff member. He wrote a redlining blues, which is based on I and Dr. Oliver Rosales' work that kind of outlines the importance of this history and how it impacts our cultures today. Hello? Okay. Oh, I'll introduce Dr. Oliver Rosales.
Good afternoon, everybody. I want to say, as a historian, it is so exciting to be in a room full of archivists because, we can't do what we do as historians without archivists. And these two archivists, for me, have been very, very important over the years. So I applaud Chris not only for putting together this panel, but for being an epistemic activist archivist in Bakersfield for, gosh, definitely over a decade now, and Donato, following right in his footsteps. So it's, again, exciting for me to be here as a historian, to talk a little bit about my research and how it tries to apply some of the archives work that they've talked about to historical problems, and also how I try to deal with this in the classroom. So I'll begin by saying that, the Central Valley has an archives problem. And I realized this quickly as I was, doing my doctoral coursework, and, my colleagues at USC or UCLA, they were all writing dissertations on LA. LA doesn't have an archives problem. Y'all, and if you're from LA, y'all do great work. But in the Central Valley, particularly if you're trying to research questions beyond some of the more well-known topics like water or the Okie migration, it's difficult, right? And for me personally, my family's been there for over a century, but I never saw myself or my family in the historical record. So when we talk about epistemic activism, that's what I'm thinking. And in terms of archives problems in the Central Valley, one of the most important Central Valley archives is in Detroit, right? So kids on the ground, they can't go to Detroit, they can't go to Wayne State. It's the United Farmworkers Archive, right? And God bless Cesar Chavez for his wisdom and partnering with the Labor Center there so that history could be preserved, because I'm quite convinced that if the United Farmworker Archive had been left in the Central Valley, it probably would have been destroyed. So again, when I hear this term about epistemic activism, it has real and tangible consequences, if you will. And, I could talk about, there were other sessions about the kind of current moment. And I'm feeling that as a historian, when President Trump signed the executive order to restore sanity to American history, or, the attacks that are happening on the Smithsonian right now. Again, I feel that deeply, not only as a writer and historian, but for my colleagues who work in public history and preservation. This moment is just absolutely precarious, but we're fighting back, right, and talking about it, and we're open to conversation. I'll say something very briefly about the book that's up here, Civil Rights in Bakersfield. One of the ways that the work that Chris and Donato have done that was applicable to me, there's not a lot of scholarship on the Central Valley, even though it has a deep history. The book is about the urban civil rights movement in Bakersfield, coalitions between Black folks and brown folks and basically racial white liberals, to enhance civil rights reform in a whole variety of capacities, from the integration of the housing market to the war on poverty to grassroots politics. But one of the things I experienced as I was shopping the book around, the book idea, is the University of Texas Press, which has a long history of publishing good work in Chicano history. They wanted a primer chapter on the history of segregation. And most of my work was on post-World War II activism. So how do you write a history if there's no records? Well, enter Donato Cruz and Chris and the work that they were doing on preserving redlining and the history of restrictive covenants in Bakersfield. And there's been a lot of great work on that across the United States, but not in the Valley, in particular because of the way that the lines were drawn, the population thresholds didn't count. So the data crunching that they're doing is absolutely amazing. And I was able to kind of leverage that in that opening primer chapter that the press wanted. In addition to historian Al Camarillo from Stanford, I saw somewhere on the program a Stanford archivist here. Al Camarillo, aside from being a wonderful, eminent historian, served as a consultant in a segregation case in Kern County, where the Board of Supervisors were sued by the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund for racially gerrymandering Latino communities. So Al basically shared with me some of his legal work that he did. And so that was a critical intervention for the production of that book. Now, in terms of like a historiographical problem, again, as it relates to archives, it's interesting. We're approaching in a few weeks the 60-year anniversary of the Delano grape strike. And about 10 years or so ago, Cal State Bakersfield helped organize the 50-year anniversary celebration of the United Farm Workers movement in Delano. And putting that together, one of the things that Chris and I witnessed kind of behind the scenes is that, there was a lot of sort of competition, if you will, over the celebration of memory, right? And how memory is contested. And again, I think it reflects this archives problem that is happening, right? And we're trying to solve. I was talking to Chris before this that in a couple of weeks, the Filipino community of Delano, they're going to be initiating this public celebration on the 60th anniversary, and they're doing oral histories in partnership with them, right, to preserve those stories, to generate those stories. But again, these are things that oftentimes can't be found on the ground in the Valley, or they're buried in people's garages, or again, you have to travel to Detroit to kind of get those people's histories, if you will. I wanted to say when I was doing my dissertation, I had to travel all across America to learn the story of Bakersfield. It wasn't found locally, particularly histories of segregation. A lot of that was absolutely swept under the rug, or it's buried in people's garages. And I think it was maybe during Donato's presentation, some of the photographs that you were seeing were from that exhibit that they did where, I had never seen a photograph of the Ku Klux Klan in Bakersfield in the 1920s. We knew anecdotally that they were there, but we hadn't seen the photos. So again, it's a real intervention that they're doing and talking about race in this space. For my own work, I'll say, I did some grassroots kind of archiving along the way. One of the most important organizations for myself was the Community Service Organization. This is sort of like the NAACP for Mexican Americans. Started here in LA, helping elect Ed Roybal to the city council. I just heard that Cal State Northridge just acquired the LA CSO collection, which is a huge deal. But Bakersfield also had an incredibly active chapter, and that history is available at Stanford. A lot of it's not available locally. The two gentlemen there, the Bañales, fathers and son, helped run the organization along with the Govea family on the bottom. The little girl, she's in the far upper left-hand corner, Jessica Govea. She was an alumni of Bakersfield College, Bakersfield High School, dropped out of school in 1965, joined the United Farm Workers, and basically never looked back, and became an organizer in the Canadian boycotts and served on the UFW executive board. So she's really well known as a kind of Latina organizer activist. She passed away about 2 decades ago, but she has an important history rooted in Bakersfield. The image of the kind of abandoned building, that was the headquarters of the Bakersfield CSO. So I don't know if we'll maybe talk about this in the discussion, but some of the impact of the work that I think that I've done, that Chris is doing, that Donata's doing, again, the city council minutes that we're playing, it's raising the consciousness of the city to preserve its history, particularly in Old Town Kern, which has a history that goes back a century with immigrant groups, which in this case is where that CSO building is located. I'll also give a huge shout out to the local Filipino community in the Central Valley. They've been absolutely phenomenal in getting the National Park Service to pay attention to the Filipino immigrant narrative in Kern County in the Valley. And the hope is Senator Alex Padilla has pending legislation to establish the Cesar Chavez National Park. It has monument status now, but bringing the NPS resources for a national park would influx a lot of critical dollars, right, into preserving that history, including one of the sites there, the Filipino Community Hall, which is a sort of diasporic site of cultural preservation for Filipinos going back a century. And more importantly, maybe during the Delano grape strike from 1965 to 1970, where Mexicans and Filipinos broke bread together, right, and were able to overcome those racial divides that growers had pitted them against each other to lower the price of labor. This is an example of some teaching that I've done in terms of archives generation. There are scholars on the Valley. Most of them don't live in the Valley. In the photograph on the left, we brought Gabriel Thomas, who's up in the Bay Area. He's a prolific journalist, but he writes a lot about the Valley. And he got to meet students and they got to read his book. And that's just a totally revelatory moment for community college students. On the right-hand side, it's a digital Delano project that I still do. I had an email this morning from a student whose grandparents marched with Robert Kennedy in 1966 when he came to Bakersfield. They have documents and stuff. I was like, this has to be preserved. But we did these fun generation projects where people would show up and the families would come, and it was really, really a blessing. But we were able to leverage that a little bit. I think it was NEH who funded that. This is a project I co-directed at CSU Bakersfield twice. The first time was as part of NEH Landmarks grants, where teachers from across America would come to Kern County to learn about our labor and civil rights history. And part of that, again, is about archives, exposing people to the kinds of sources that are out there, digital databases, but also physical site visits. The first time we did this, it was incredibly successful, so successful that NEH funded us again, but Elon got a hold of us and cut it along with all the other NEH funding. Hopefully, we'll see how the lawsuit's pending, but again, a lot of interest in, I think, the Central Valley history beyond the borders of the Valley. Again, a huge shout out to the folks who work at the National Chavez Center in Keene, California. This is just east of Bakersfield. But that monument site, and I applaud President Obama for having the foresight to make this a national monument. In the photograph on the right-hand side, we've done some professional development with teachers, both K through 12 in college and university, who have a chance to go to La Paz and learn about their history. And it's because the UFW archive is, again, across the country, it's very meaningful to people to see the place where Caesar's buried or the strike coordination happened. I think I have a photograph maybe in my next slide. These are my Delano photos of where his fast took place. Again, thinking about teaching, we partnered with our theater program at Bakersfield College to do Luis Valdez, the famous playwright who wrote La Bamba, Zoot Suit. He's got his start as a theatric on the fields of Delano, right? Teaching farm workers about labor history and scabs and picket lines through performance art. And so our students in our theater program had a chance to do some of these early Luis Valdez productions in Delano. And I was telling them, I said, this is probably the first time that Teatro Campesino has been, our farm workers theater has been in Delano in, half a century. And it was, again, a very revelatory moment for that. These are, again, just some examples of monument tours that we've done with students, with college faculty. And, you know, when we talk about archives, it's not just about the stuff on, you know, the computers or in a physical archive, but it's also about place. Like, I can't underscore that enough. And for the kind of history that I'm talking about right now, this migrant history, this ephemerate history, this itinerant history, like, you have to go there and see it with a certain set of eyes. And it takes this kind of conditioning and layering in the classroom in order for students, particularly young migrant kids or the children of farm workers or kids who are farm workers themselves, who maybe walk by the fields every day but never realize the deep history in their own backyards. That's what I'm committed to, not only in the classroom, but I have to partner with, you know, historians who write about the region, and certainly the archivists who write about the region, in order to preserve that history. I'll close with talking about something that maybe will come up in the Q&A as well. So when I think about sustainability, one of the things that I did, and I'll give a huge shout out to Sonia Christian, who's the chancellor for all of the California community colleges. It was really her idea for me to develop the Cesar Chavez Leadership Certificate. And it was after Joe Biden was elected, and Jill Biden, there was a bust of Cesar Chavez in the office that was huge behind the Resolute desk. But Jill Biden came to Delano. She came to 40 Acres, which is the home of the UFW, and did a speech. I think they did a citizenship thing. But Sonia, who was our chancellor at the time for Kern Community College District, had a chance to go, you know, and meet with them. I think Newsom was there. But she, as a college president and then later chancellor, had never gone there and never kind of seen the history. And she's like, you know, Oliver, we have to do something to get our students to see this. And she's like, why don't you develop a non-credit program? And at community colleges, this equals sustainability. This is free higher education. It's an on-ramp for higher education. You can have, you know, you can be a regular student, you can be a grandparent, you can not have any degree, you can enroll for free in our non-credit program, and it generates revenue for the college, right? And basically pays for itself. But I had to go through the curriculum development process, and that was incredibly contentious. So when we talk about, you know, epistemic activism, you have activism in context, right, where there's resistance. So I felt the real resistance on this. And I'll close by saying, as I was pushing this through our curriculum committee, you know, the Bakersfield Police Department had to show up to the meetings because there was an alternate side that wanted to have this history not preserved. And to have to fight and overcome that took the coordination of a lot of different constituent groups. So again, I am deeply thankful to the work that Chris is doing, that Donata is doing, not only for my own research, but again, for generations to come. So I'll close on that. Thank you.
Before we enter into the Q&A, I want to bring up the word cloud and just kind of see what we got. So one of the big, I guess, key components to this concept of epistemic activism, it's finding ways to facilitate public engagement and building out networks and what have you. And so I was really interested to kind of hear how you all thought about this element here. And we do it all, we do this every day in our jobs, right? That's a key component, I think. But how do we do it? So I'm just gonna take a look for a minute here and digest some of this. So some of the, you know, the common players, you know, exhibits, you know, those are big ways to get to facilitate this engagement and create dialogue. This is something we rely on majorly in our programming and in our strategies of curating new information that our community can use. And we take it a little bit further. Our exhibits are student designed and researched with our guidance, so that allows them to get more sense of community, and that they're actually, doing research that is facilitating change, or at the very least, creating a dialogue. Do you have any thoughts, panel, on our workload here? I can't, if you want to see. Yeah, I guess that was kind of a bad logistic there. So, some of the things we have up here, we have like community, event, partnership, trust, curriculum, open collaboration, visible, interview, connection, training, family. Maybe you could speak a little bit more on the family aspect.
Yeah, I could say I've had a lot of success in Delano, California, because it's such a family-oriented community. But it's also difficult because at least with the history of the farm workers, those are stories that folks have to feel comfortable talking about. Or when we're talking about border crossing, like it takes a certain level of conditioning for the students to develop the capacity to even have those conversations with their parents or grandparents or aunts and uncles. But I have seen on the back end when everybody's really thankful that the curriculum was structured in a way where then they felt value, that maybe they had never thought about their uncle or aunt in that particular way. Or your colleague at CSU Bakersfield Education, Adam Sawyer, he published an article on using case studies from my students in Delano. I can't remember the title off the top of my head, but it was where a student said something to that effect, that she now knew she came from someplace special, where, in the Valley, they're known as island communities, like it's not a metropolitan, right? These are isolated communities. Sometimes people never leave. For those of you who've seen the movie McFarland, right? Like McFarland and Delano, Bakersfield, but it's all this island community chains in the San Joaquin Valley. And it's a miracle those kids got to go to the beach, right? But again, when it comes to families, there's so much cultural capital there, but as archivists, as teachers, like there's a real level of training that we need to unlock those things. Not only language, but other kinds of skill sets that aren't necessarily taught in doctoral programs, maybe?
We'll open up for questions as well, while you're kind of digesting a question. You can come up to this mic here. While we're kind of thinking, I'm going to kind of pose a few here. Donato, you've partnered with multiple institutions, from education institutions to the city of Bakersfield. Can you discuss a little bit about what challenges or breakthroughs you've encountered in making archival research accessible and actionable for these diverse stakeholders?
So I think some of the challenges are that, at least from like a policy perspective, like your city council member, your board of supervisor, they, I think, expect a lot of the work to be done. I think I met with the city council member, and I'm very happy that we met. I'm very happy that he had a lot of asks, but his was like, oh, like LA has this wonderful book, could we write one for Bakersfield that way? And, I think what makes me happy is to hear that they are receptive to research. But I think to kind of go in with what Oliver was saying about his students and building that trust that their history matters, is that when you do that, the students go to your archive. So I think those are some of the breakthroughs, that they're very interested and they really want to move it forward. I think when we do any of the galleries, people, because in the archives we're all locked up, right? So the checkout desk will call me and say, hey, there's a student waiting for you in the gallery and they have a question, right? And I think once we start doing more critically engaging topics, we started getting more of those types of interactions where students said, oh, I see this on your wall. Where did you get that? I've been looking for it, right? And I think, saying, hey, I'll send you an email, or hey, here's a citation, has been such an open type of dialogue conversation. And even if we don't have it, I tell them this is where I found it, right? So we do a lot of triaging.
Questions? So, Oliver, you've led initiatives like the Cesar Chavez Leadership Certificate, which you kind of ended on, and monument tours as well. How do these experiential learning opportunities reshape students' understanding of civil rights and activism in the Central Valley? And could you speak a little bit to the quirky political climate that we're in as well.
So I can begin by thinking of what I did recently. It was last year, I think, where I took a group of students from Delano to the National Monument in Keene, and many of them came with their parents. And a lot of the kids are bilingual; they'll speak English and Spanish, but the parents don't. Many of them are not literate at all. And so to watch, when we were talking earlier about the park rangers there, like Miranda, she speaks Spanish. It's good that she's on staff, right? We had a colleague who's fluent in Spanish. So the parent is not only a learning thing for the kids, but to see their parents suddenly see their history reflected in a public exhibit that's hidden. I mean, when we say Keene or things like this, like there's a reason that Cesar Chavez founded that compound in the hills outside of Bakersfield, because he was the next on the assassination list, right? So no one kind of knows it's there. So when Obama came, it was like, oh, he's really bringing attention to it. So for me, as I see students, not only are they transformed, but they're transformed because they see their parents maybe kind of realize why education matters, right? Maybe they know it anyway, but it's like, okay, you're talking about it. Oh, there's a ranger here. There's this plaque monument here. At least with La Paz in Keene, I'm a consultant. We're redoing the exhibit to be bilingual, fully bilingual. It's not right now. The hope is by 2027, when it's Cesar Chavez's 100-year birthday, that the exhibit will be done by then. But again, it's about accessibility, right? And telling a more complete story that is relevant to the lived experiences of the people in the Valley. And then in terms of like the quirky political stuff in the Valley, it's difficult maybe for folks who aren't there to appreciate it. My book, before it was called Civil Rights in Bakersfield, was called Mississippi West. And it was a term that was floated around in the 1960s to kind of describe, the racial climates out west from Vegas to LA, but also Bakersfield, and about Jim Crow. I mean, and there's still that legacy today. Donato and I were at a conference a few weeks ago with Jim Gregory from the University of Washington, who wrote the book on the Okie migration. And he came up to me after I gave a little talk on the book, and he's like, Oliver, that is needed. Like 400,000 people in Bakersfield, but the history stops, in the Depression. Like you have a community that's like literally without its history. So again, there's many books that could be written on Bakersfield, but it's going to take archives. It's going to take that intentional archives building. So again, I absolutely applaud that work that you're doing. Again, continue to hold the administration's, feet to the fire to give you guys the resources that you need to do.
Yeah, it is definitely we're in a very deep red county in a deep blue state. So there's some really weird stuff that goes on. Kevin McCarthy, probably remember him, don't want to remember him. He's a graduate of CSUB. We have him in the archive. Yeah, I see him on campus all the time walking his dogs, but that kind of gives you kind of an idea of what we're at. And some of the other weird things, though, we have a congressional district up there that was actually districted to be a blue district, Valdeo's district, but it's really kind of a purple district, and it kind of flips back and forth. And so there's just a lot of strange politics that go on out there. Right now, we're in a battle. We're the only city, I think, or one of the few cities in the United States that doesn't have a Cesar Chavez Boulevard. Yep. We're at ground zero, right? This is Bakersfield and Kern County. That's the founding of the UFW and AWOC. Yet we don't have this namesake for one of our streets. And it just, if you watch the last city council meeting, you really see just how the racist tensions really are bubbling to the top. And now that we're in this time that we're experiencing, people are even more bold, right? And so that kind of plays into what we're doing, is how to navigate through this, and also how can we effectively push back when we're being pushed back against. So
Chris, so I know you had the poll. Could you explain to us what you meant by neutral and proactive?
Okay, so yeah, did anybody answer the poll about should archives be neutral or proactive? And I got a lot of pushback on it. It was like, well, what do you mean by neutral? What do you mean by proactive? So I go back to, and I'm not going to revisit our grad school debates over Schellenberg, but I think back to Schellenberg and his idea of archival neutrality. And this, when I started my career, I had this idea that we just kind of wait for the collections to come to us and we process them and make them, available. And we still do that. I mean, I'm not saying that, that's something that we don't do. But we don't, we don't show our bias by going after one collection over the other, that kind of thing. So when I think of proactive, being a proactive archivist, kind of like what I said in my introduction, is that, we look for language and descriptive standards, and we challenge those words that shouldn't be in there anymore. We help develop new languages, descriptive terms that are more inclusive, right? Being proactive, in our sense, thinking is that we we identify the needs of the community, right? What are the issues pressing our community, and what are the root causes? So that's where we tie it into the history, right? And so for us, being proactive was going out and curating these restrictive covenants. And I don't know if you caught the language that was being used. It's very, very restrictive, racist language. And we curate this collection, and then we take it to our community leaders and explain what our findings are, and hopefully be able to be in the conversation just to make suggestions of how we can affect change within our community. And so as Donato mentioned, we've had the city council use our research. We're in the California Educators Together curriculum database, so educating our next generations of students to be activists in their communities. That's what this is all about. So,
Does anybody have questions?
yeah, please come up.
So I guess one of my core question is, in order to be able to utilize the archival collection, you need to know what material is there, and that takes time and labor. But once you even find it, then you have time and labor to do the outreach process. So can you talk about like that balance of like operational needs of like processing versus, the output that really kind of put you on the map? I'm sure that was probably a struggle just to even figure out.
So I'm going to say I'm lucky because that's my manager, right? So you're lucky if you're working together, right? I think there's some, I think a lot of the panels have acknowledged administrative conflicts, right? Especially when it seems like the priority, especially for staff, because I'm a staff member and Chris is a faculty member. A lot of the staff, I think staff are directed towards labor outcomes rather than these partnerships, right? Our university, even though it has some problems, I think they're redirecting for what they're calling Kern County's university. So the dean is liking the way that we're partnering with our city council and some of these organizations, because we seem to be community oriented, right? So I think we were doing that before the president said that was kosher, right? So I think in that ways we've aligned perfectly. I think I heard from another panel that you're expected to do your daily job on top of these things, right? So I think we have interns who help me process, and really allowing them to take that agency to lead our archive forward as they get to in some cases we have paid students, some are academic credit students. So I think for me, my daily task is like a calendar, right? So the like 2 hours for processing, after lunch, what am I gonna do? If a class is coming in, that's the priority. Fridays are pretty easy. So Fridays are just like my, my wants in the archive. So I think, calendaring has been very important to me.
I'll add on a little bit to that. We have a very robust internship program. We're very embedded in the history department. I actually teach 2 courses in the history, public history emphasis, oral history methods and archives and special collections. And we also have a practicum that all history students are required to take. And so we try to intertwine all our initiatives with, the basic learning structure that that we expect out of our students. So are we missing things? I think probably we are. We're not a very, it's the 2 of us, but we have probably on any given semester 15, 16 students helping us out. One of my big fears is creating archival silences out of this, and cultural appropriation, so there's a lot of moving parts here, and I just, hope I'm staying on track, so.
I'll have one comment especially for those that I know through the plenary session today was, I think some of the points was or was it the other panel? I don't remember, but some of the thing was articulating your work to your leadership. So what I've been doing now is like pretty much, that's how I found those reports. Anytime we show up anywhere that's our collection, I make sure I send that to our dean, to others who can say, wow, like our work is really transformative, even when I'm just Googling like our institution and the citations, right? But because that makes a difference to them, to show that we're not just working for a database that no one's ever accessing. I use Google Analytics. We've integrated Google Analytics to our website, to archive space. So I do a lot of data metrics now. We have an annual report. That's a good way to kind of show that your work is transformative, right? And then also with the partnerships with our, community college, with our university, kind of showcasing that work that we've done.
Okay, this was a question, just as someone who grew up in the Central Valley, so Modesto, just thinking back to like, we celebrated Cesar Chavez Day and we never talked about it, and just driving past all the fields and seeing, the migrant workers, sorry, it's like having like way like just going down memory road. So I guess more for me, just I mean Bakersfield, there is a rich history there and so much, but just kind of curious as how you can see it going up like the 99, like to Modesto. Like I know there's Stan State and Turlock, how maybe partnering with those. I don't live there anymore, but I'm really curious about this history. So it's just be nice to learn more about where I grew up and this history I did not know. So just from a personal point of view, thank you. This is really fascinating.
So one thing that I want, so the next steps of this project, of the housing and redlining project, is to crawl up the valley. And looking in, as near as we can tell, as near as I can tell, I think we're the only archive that's really doing redlining work. There's, other like sociology departments and other political science that are doing it. But we do want to crawl up the valley and really focus on the Central Valley as a whole, because that's going to help enrich the overall history, right? And tell a bigger story and hopefully uncover some of these other rich histories, right? So thank you for your question.
Thanks. It wasn't really a question, just thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Hi,
Hi.
I'm the Dolores Huerta archivist. Hi, nice to see you again outside of, Tuesdays.
Yeah.
So my question is kind of the opposite. What kinds of partnerships would you like to see with local archives like the Dolores Huerta Foundation, the Cesar Chavez Foundation, who are both represented here by their archivists today?
Thank you. I want to acknowledge Eric Romero's in the house series, the archivist up at the Chavez Foundation, and we serve together on the Bakersfield College archives board. So for me, I just want to be involved as much as I can with all of our groups, right? I mean, it goes back to like, the time thing, but So one thing about CSU Bakersfield is we're relatively a new archive. We reestablished in 2014 after a long hiatus of not collecting even university history. So I've been working hard to try and reestablish connections. I'm happy that I've been able to work with Eric and Andreas Chavez, Cesar Chavez's grandson, and collaborate on things, So, and I realize that we're all doing similar work, but I think I need to keep in mind that there's things that you're not going to collect that I should be collecting. If I find things that should be with the Dolores Huerta Foundation or the Dolores Huerta Archives or the Cesar Chavez Archives, I want to push them that way. But the other thing I think we need to do, and I'd like to see with the three of us, is we're a Hispanic serving institution at CSUB, and how can we enrich those connections to get our students to work with you guys, right? To go to where the history is, and could that be through internships? Could it be through any kind of measure? But also to partner on some of these social justice issues that are facing us right now. So that's the key component of epistemic activism, I think, is that you got to do something with the information, and that something is to affect that change in your community. And so I think that's where we can really do some good work partnering. So,
Can I say something to that, Chris? Or, I'm sorry. Well, just as an idea, Lori Coyle, the filmmaker, she did Audio Some More. If you haven't seen it, the story of Maria Moreno. One of her ideas was to take some students from Bakersfield to the UFW archive in Detroit, and just kind of, because the kids there, they've never been out of the Valley. They don't know what an archive is. So like being able to go to the Dolores Huerta archive, or even going to La Paz, or going to, it's transformational, right? Yeah. And so I'd like to see the partnerships between universities, the stakeholder groups, really have an intervention in the students, and like you can actually do archives work, and they can realize that they exist for them. Let's not underappreciate that.
Let's say maybe like a consortium, or maybe a shared finding aid system, right? Where we can have more interlinked data. Definitely something that Chris and I have talked over the years. It definitely takes a lot of financial funds, right? To have an interlinked system. I'm thinking more like the California State University libraries. They have like the One Search. They share like books and resources. So I think in those ways we can definitely have more of a shared history, and also one that I know there's a lot of problem with institutions. So definitely to peel back some of those institutional challenges, right, and to really move forward the history, and to really move forward the understanding.
any other questions?
Yes. Hi, my name is Yasmin. I'm actually a graduate student at San Jose State. I'm doing my MLIS program, but I did undergrad in UC Merced. And something that I've noticed is that there's a lot of people in the Bay Area who are slowly starting to move to the Central Valley because, housing is so expensive in the Bay. And maybe Bakersfield is experiencing the same thing. So I was just wondering, what kind of role do you see the archives playing in a community that can potentially change pretty drastically within the next 20 or 30 years? And how might that connect to your redlining project as well?
One example, I think, has a very strong relationship there. So there's this whole idea of like the pilgrimage, like going to Delano, maybe not permanently, but to experience that history. And gosh, like when you think about people moving there, though, I I don't have an answer for that, other than just, there is a strong relationship between the Bay Area and Valley because of the UFW.
I think with this project, I've become more aware of those changes in the recent years. One of the questions that one of our education professors, she was looking at our redlining data, those white-only neighborhoods, and she overlaid it with current demographic, and all our previously segregated white-only neighborhoods were now primarily Hispanic, and it's the most affordable part of the city. It's also the part that has the most renters and the most decline, right? So I think it brought up a lot of questions of, if your historical data says this, why is this now? And I think it brought up a lot of questions to answer, why we need to continue to include, pretty much the changing demographics, right? And hold them as stakeholders so they can tell us the stories of, why this neighborhood has changed significantly. So I think when there's a history to a place, there's a history to understanding of how it's changing as well.
I think one of the key components is the education arm, the work that Oliver's doing, and our ethnic studies department, CSUB, in educating our students, to the not only the history but also what's currently going on, right? And then creating more activists, because we have to speak our voice, and the more organized you are, right, the better results you get. So that would be my response to that. And I just think that would be one of the important things to this. So thank you for the question. Yeah.
Trying to word this in my head, so I'm sorry if it comes off a little rambly, but I'll get there eventually. So I work with public libraries in the state of Georgia and try and help them deal with their local history collections. And we deal with a lot of boards that are very right-leaning, or there's all the book bans and removing books from the library, and people are focusing on those situations, understandably. And so I'm wondering how you decide now is the time to push this project and to get this history out there, because so many of these libraries have such a rich collection that they don't even know what they have because they don't have the time to deal with it. And that sometimes feels like I'm pushing them to deal with it, and they're like, you deal with it, please, and how do you say this is the time, even though you have 10 other things you want to be doing?
It's a good question.
The moment, like the conversation about Cesar Chavez Boulevard in Bakersfield, it's so politically contentious. What is CSUB going to say about it? Somebody once told me, who was at CSUB when it was founded, the faculty weren't allowed to talk about the farm worker movement, right, in 1970. So the work that you're doing now is a total, 180. So sometimes the circumstances, make the institutions go after the pressing questions, but you have to do it with courage. You can't shy away, right? Yeah. Yeah, and you're in the, I understand your situation, you're in a deep red state, right? And, we're in a deep red county in a blue state, so that kind of helps soften it a little bit. But my first reaction is like, you can't be afraid to push back against that, but you're in, the situation is different, right? So I think one of the key things is to know, or to be in tune with the political climate. How far right is this, this group that you're dealing with, or, where are they coming from? One strategy is to find commonalities. I know that sometimes that's hard to do. Sometimes it's moving to the quiet fight, the things that, the wins that you can secure, right? I know it sounds a little abstract, but that's, and I worked at a public library up there in Kern County as well. And yeah, some of the different complaints you get are just so kooky, like about a book or about, so I feel your pain.
My real world advice is that this is all emotionally demanding. At least choose something that you're interested in, right? Even if it's one topic at a time, at least you're motivated by your research interests, right? And your community partners, right? To make sure that they're aligned, because the truth is you're not always going to be paid for it, right? And you're not always going to be appreciated or treasured. And I know I have, even though this research, and I have a lot of examples of great partners, we've had criticisms. Someone came in and said, our gallery was just complaining that we were doing nothing. Yet the city council put it in their plan. There was a lot of deliverables, but in someone's eyes was still just, we did nothing. So I would say, if you treasure the things you're doing and with those partners that support you, it's going to be a lot more fulfilling.
And one more thing I'll add is build your coalitions, you know, seek out those like-minded people and gradually build those networks. And, you know, you'll be surprised, you know, who's actually thinking the same way, right? So, yeah. Well, I think that concludes our talk. I really appreciate you coming in today.